and it is the book is extremely well received by. Let's see here. We have Peter Singer, the atheist professor at Princeton, who believes that you have a 30-day return policy on your child. If you think it's sufficiently sick, you should kill it. And Alan Dershowitz, who is a big fan of secularism himself, and whom I debated in New York City, that the people that it is far more likely for an evangelical Christian leader than an academic secular professor to acknowledge the threat emanating from Islam. You acknowledge that. And so on the greatest moral problem of our day as you see it, and that is the threat from Islamic totalitarianism, it is religious Americans far more likely to see that danger than secular Americans. And I don't think you have an answer to that.
Well, it's something I can concede.
Discuss it. The question that bothers you and bothers me, however, more than anything, is who is more likely to make a good world. And I argue to you that the secular world, the anti-religious secular world, is a moral failure when it comes to acknowledging evil. It failed on communism, and it's failing on Islamic totalitarianism.
Well, I believe...
So the fruit of your ideas, as rational as you think they are, stinks. The university is a moral idiot place. The university is a place where people believe nonsense like men and women are basically the same.
You can rail against the university, and
if you said this at Stanford, where you teach publicly, you would be regarded as an anti-multiculturalist right-wing bigot.
Right, and that's the inheritance of the religious intolerance that we suffered for hundreds of years under Christianity in Europe, and to significant degree in the birth of our own nation. So we are right to respect the consequences of demonizing one religious group over another. The issue, however, is
why? Excuse me. The religious right demonized communism, and you secularists didn't.
But Dennis,
even on an atheist doctrine, the religious were more morally accurate.
Communism was not an instance of reason run amok. Communism was essentially a political religion. It was deeply irrational. I mean, it was not otherworldly.
I know it was, but it wasn't a God-based religion. It was a secular religion. Fine, I have no problem with saying that. But again, you secularists failed in acknowledging the real evil, and the religious folks in America did. You're 0 for 2.
Well,
you can't. The two biggest evils of your lifetime went unrecognized by the secular liberal world.
That could easily be disputed, but I really think
why you agree with me? Why would you say it's disputed? You agree with me?
It is no. It is not. I'm not conceding that the best diagnosis of the evils of communism or Nazism or the Khmer Rouge is their atheism. That was not the problem. The problem was another sort of dogma, political dogma, under Mullah Omar. The killing never stops. Now, we have outgrown this.
The killing never stops because there were so many wars of conquest. The killings do stop, in fact. And there are laws in the same Deuteronomy that if a man in war finds a woman that he wants to rape, he cannot touch her for 30 days, that she has to, in fact, mourn her relatives, sit in his home. She has to be allowed to cry. He can't touch her, and after 30 days he wants her, he has to marry her.
And he can also sell his daughter into slavery, and he should be killed if he
No, you're not allowed to sell you're not allowed. No, in fact, there's a law against selling your daughter into prostitution and into slavery, but however, they did have bonded indemniture. Listen, anything you raise, I'll actually give you a scholarly answer to, because I've been teaching this my whole life, and I don't expect that you would have.
Well,
if you read it without scholarship, it's bonded indemniture. Where we had in our society, and almost every society had. And yes, your daughter could be a bonded servant. That is correct. 3,000 years ago, when this was written, that was possible. That is correct.
There's
I don't have a problem with it.
Where the creator of the universe rescinds these rules. He doesn't say that when you get to the new world and develop 3 branches of government, it's okay to
but isn't it remarkable? Isn't it remarkable because Jews and Christians did rescind the need to do so because bonded indemniture.
The influence of secular dialogue.
All right, you can argue that. Right, and I would argue that the absence of God is more likely to give us Gulag and Auschwitz than it is to give us enlightenment. We'll be
having an interest, having experience, having something that having a
Well,
source of pain.
no human fetus has that experience. So,
Oh, no,
why does it matter if it's 3 days or 6 months?
Oh, it matters tremendously.
What is the experience of a 6-month-old fetus?
Well,
they didn't talk to anybody. They have no memory.
A 6-month-old fetus is viable and certainly a system that can feel pain, probably with some degree of acuity that you and I would recognize.
Then why is almost the entire secular world of which you are a member against the ban on partial birth abortion?
Well, this is an issue of how polarized our discussion is because of the intrusion of faith-based dogma into these questions of policy. Secular people have been forced not to talk sensibly about the very real ethical issues that surround abortion.
So it's religious people's fault that secular people are not sensible.
Well, because yes,
that's remarkable. That is a first, I have to say.
Well, Dennis, they're so embattled by the dogmatism which says that at the moment of conception, a soul is fully formed, and therefore there is no slippery slope. There's no conversation worth having. Life is life. It's sacred, and block all.
I have to say to you that I find that more rational. Now, just saying rational than the secular argument that a woman who's having an abortion is doing what she wants with her own body, since that is prima facie irrational, since it's not her body, it's in her body.
But see, this is
I have lived a life, Sam, where I have seen the secular produce far more irrationality in my civilization, not in the Middle East, than the religious have. That's the great challenge to you, Sam.
Well, no,
the secular produce foolishness.
That there are situations where starving to death is a bad option.
Okay,
now,
let's stay on the hot shot. I'm not big on starvation, although I don't believe Ms. Shivo felt anything. All the doctors say the same thing.
Right.
Say I'm depressed, and say I'm a drug addict or an alcoholic, and I don't want to live anymore, and I walk in, and you think that the doctors are right to take my life because I don't want to live anymore?
Well, we have to be...
Wait, answer that question, sir, if you would.
Well, if we have to analyze the situation very carefully.
I just gave you the situation.
Well,
I'm depressed. I'm an addict. I don't want to live anymore. I walk in. I ask for a hot shot. Right. Should the doctor give it to me?
Well, not if your depression isn't medicated. I mean, we have remedies for depression, but people who are depressed, we know, are not the best judges.
Right, but what if they say, look, I've been on Prozac and heroin for 18 years. I've had enough. I don't want to live. Would you give the state the authority to grant the person's wishes to end his or her own life if they didn't have a terminal disease? Would you?
I think the decision should rest with the person ultimately.
Okay, so
we should give that person.
And that's the secular approach that we have in Holland and a lot of other places.
Right, absolutely.
That if you don't want to live, you can walk into a clinic or a doctor and say, "I don't want to live, doc." It will never happen.
Well,
Life. If you have an illness that's terminal, I could understand. If you're depressed, because you could always change your mind. I don't think the state has the authority to do that. Go ahead.
Well, there are people. It's just if you do not think that there's a situation where you are, with the full presence of your mind, are competent to judge that you want to die and don't want to live another moment. You're just not thinking clearly enough.
Well, then suicide should not be illegal.
It should not be. Absolutely not.
So anybody can do anything they want with their body.
Jesus was born of a virgin, or that Muhammad went to heaven on a winged horse. That would be part of our rational worldview.
Now again, Sam's the one who brings up the virgin birth and Islam, and we can assume that he knows what he's talking about since he talks about Christianity and Islam quite a bit in his books. But when Stephen Colbert runs with the topic that Sam brought up and says that Jesus was born of a virgin, Sam shares some of his expertise and tells his viewers what Islam has to say about the virgin birth.
I've got historical evidence. The Bible tells me Jesus was born of a virgin.
Yeah, but...
I mean, there's your witness right there, the Bible.
Unfortunately, the Quran says that anyone who thinks that is going to spend eternity in hell.
But we're not talking about the Quran, we're talking about the Bible.
So, according to the Quran, anyone who thinks that Jesus was born of a virgin will spend eternity in hell. I've never bothered to correct Sam on this, but since he literally asked for it, let's check the Quran. Here's Surah 3, verses 45 to 47. And mention when the angels said, O Mary, indeed Allah gives you good tidings of a word from him, whose name will be the Messiah, Jesus the Son of Mary, distinguished in this world and the hereafter, and among those brought near to Allah. He will speak to the people in the cradle and in maturity, and will be of the righteous. She said, My Lord, how will I have a child when no man has touched me? The angel said, Such is Allah, He creates what he wills. When he decrees a matter, he only says to it, be, and it is. This is one of several passages in the Quran dealing with the virgin birth of Jesus, yet Sam Harris doesn't seem to be aware of any of them. Keep in mind, Sam says this after he studied Islam for his book, The End of Faith. Why is this a problem? Well, the virgin birth of Jesus is kind of Islam 101-ish. In fact, this is pre-Islam 101. This is something you'll hear in the first 5 minutes of your first ever conversation with a Muslim. There are, of course, plenty of people in the world who don't know any Muslims and who don't know what the Quran says about the virgin birth. But if you don't know what the Quran says about the virgin birth, you probably shouldn't go on television and start telling people what the Quran says about the virgin birth.
You can't, or is that too complicated for you?
It's true.
Now, to be fair, we all make mistakes. Some of us just do it on a popular television show as we try to promote a book, the credibility of which is severely undermined by our embarrassing blunder on the very topic we're claiming to be experts on. The sad part here is that this mob of clueless narcissistic teenagers who call themselves the new atheists, they go to Sam Harris to learn about religion. They go to a guy who not only doesn't know what he's talking about, but also writes books and does TV shows on the very topics he doesn't know about. And then people wonder why there are all these internet Harris and Dawkins drones who spend all their time trolling Facebook and Twitter talking about Islam and Christianity when they've obviously never studied either religion. Why do they abandon that age-old principle, study first, then talk, in favor of a new principle, talk always but never studied? Check the role model. Here we can only ask, why aren't these self-proclaimed skeptics at all skeptical about their sources of information? It seems that their irrational, unshakable, cult-like faith in Sam Harris, the Sam Harris delusion, we might call it, just isn't open to any sort of empirical disconfirmation. So no matter how many blunders Sam makes, his followers will do what they do best: follow. To use as one example, we can assume that he picked his best, clearest instance of Jesus demanding the blood of unbelievers.
You can take Jesus in half his moods and get some really beautiful ethical precepts like the Golden Rule. But Jesus also said things like in Luke 19, anyone who doesn't want me to reign over him, bring him before me and slay him before me.
So Jesus says in Luke 19, if anyone doesn't want me reigning over him, bring him before me and slay him before me. And this is the sort of passage that violent Christians can use to justify their violence. Let's read the verse, Luke 19, verse 27. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. Uh-oh, that is what the verse says. It's red letter, so it must be Jesus speaking. Huh. I wonder why Peter and James and John didn't run right out and start killing people. Why didn't any of the Christians in the 1st century or the 2nd century or the 3rd century start killing in the name of Jesus? Why wasn't there killing in the name of Jesus until the Roman Empire adopted Christianity and continued their Roman Empire way of dealing with disagreements? Isn't it odd that centuries of Christians completely ignored such a clear command from their Lord? Maybe they got confused by something else Jesus said and didn't realize that they were supposed to become homicidal maniacs. Maybe we should read the rest of the passage to find out what caused their confusion. Where, oh where, could this passage begin? Perhaps it starts in verse 11, right after the big heading that says, the parable of the 10 minas. Parable, huh? Isn't a parable a story? I sure hope it's not a character in this story who commands his servants to kill, because that would be a pretty crucial piece of information for Sam Harris to leave out. And as we all know, it's really easy to distort what someone is saying simply by cutting out the part where he says that it's someone else saying it. For example, did you hear what Sam Harris said at Idea City? He commanded his atheist followers to kill anyone who refuses to make him king. Look, here's proof.
Anyone who doesn't want me to reign over him, bring him before me and slay him before me.
Did you hear that? That was Sam Harris talking, wasn't it? He said those words, didn't he? No wonder so many of the bloodiest regimes in history have been atheist regimes. They were obeying Sam Harris, their king. But it gets worse. Check this out.
I mean, the creator of the universe does hate homosexuals.
What a homophobic bigot.
Gay sex is an abomination.
Sounds like Sam Harris is the new pastor of Westboro Baptist Church. Apparently, it's not very difficult to thoroughly misrepresent what someone says simply by chopping off the rest of what the person says. So let's start reading at verse 11 to make sure Sam Harris isn't misrepresenting what Jesus says. While they were listening to this, he went on to tell them a parable, because he was near Jerusalem and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. He said, "A man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return." By the way, this is actually something that happened back then. Kings in certain provinces of the Roman Empire would have to go to Rome to receive their kingdoms. King Herod the Great, for instance, had to go through this process. So he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas. "Put this money to work," he said, "until I come back." But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, "We don't want this man to be our king." This happened as well. Herod's son Archelaus went to receive his kingdom, and some of the people sent a delegation to Rome saying, "We don't want him." So parts of this story would have been familiar to Jesus' listeners. He was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for the servants to whom he had given the money in order to find out what they had gained with it. The first one came and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 10 more." "Well done, my good servant," his master replied. "Because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities." The second came and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 5 more." His master answered, "You take charge of 5 cities." Then another servant came and said, "Sir, here is your mina. I have kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you, because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in, and reap what you did not sow." His master replied, "I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in, and reaping what I did not sow? Why then didn't you put my money on deposit, so that when I came back, I could have collected it with interest?" Then he said to those standing by, "Take his mina away from him, and give it to the one who has 10 minas. "Sir," they said, "he already has 10. He replied, "I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given, but as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me." Now do you see why Peter and James and John didn't start slaughtering Jesus' enemies? It's a character in a story who says, "Bring my enemies here and kill them in front of me." But Sam Harris tells his naive, shallow-minded listeners that this is Jesus ordering his followers to kill, and this is what justifies Christian violence. What should we think of this sort of misrepresentation?
This should be terrifying to all of us.
Indeed it should, Sam.
It's actually intellectually bankrupt.
True, but there are 2 possibilities here. Either Sam doesn't know that the verse he quoted is part of a parable, in which case his research for his books was on the level of Google searching violent verses in the Bible, or he does know that the verse he quoted is part of a parable, and he deliberately kept that from his listeners in order to distort the text. Now, to me, Sam doesn't come across as someone who would deliberately deceive his listeners. So can we say that Sam's responses to the Bible just aren't the result of careful research?
They're worse than that. They are the responses of a lunatic or an idiot.